So today I'm going to be talking to you about using state and local documents for family history research. I'm going to give some credit to my colleagues. This is pulled from a number of different presentations that I've given, that Adam Oster has given, that Bernadette Bartlett, the Michigan Documents librarian, has given. So I want to give them full credit that they are part of the inspiration behind this, but we're really just trying to compile all of our knowledge into one presentation to at least get you started on the path of why state government and local government documents can be just a gold mine for family history researchers. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about the Library of Michigan. Probably many of you know this, but we were an institution created by the state of Michigan to collect, preserve, and provide access to the story of the state and to support libraries in their role as essential community anchors. Part of that preserving and providing access to the story of the state is the story of the state government and the local governments, city, township, county governments. We've been doing this work since 1828. That was during the Michigan territorial days, so we've been around a long time. And we're similar to how the Library of Congress serves on a national level. That's how we serve Michigan on a state level. So we're supporting the government employees, the work of government, but we're also there as a resource to the public, to the Michigan person. So that gives you a little timeline of what we've been doing and where we've been at. Right now, you'll see at the bottom of our PowerPoint, that's our building that we currently reside in, and that was built in 1988, 89, and it's a wonderful space. So if you haven't been there, I highly encourage you to come visit because you'll get views like this. Although, that's more at night, but it's still beautiful during the day as well. And there's plenty of space in that main atrium for research. We have 3 floors of stacks, so lots to look at, and that's just our print resources. We have a number of resources online as well. But a little bit of what you'll find, and this is not our extensive collections, this just gives you kind of a highlights of our collections. The Michigan Documents collection, so those state government documents. Those are items that are published by the state government of Michigan, and they're for the public. They're published to be seen by others. And those include things like the joint documents, annual reports of state government departments, compiled laws and rules, and so much more. And we're going to delve a little more into that too. The Michigan collection, which is what I oversee, that includes the local government documents as well as newspapers, periodicals, city directories, gazetteers, plat maps, and all sorts of other genealogical materials, and some great things to read as well. If you just want to read a Michigan author, we have fiction for Michigan authors, we have poetry for Michigan authors. So there's a lot in that collection. And then we have our law collection. Again, this will be a piece I'll touch on in this program as well. When it comes to understanding where your ancestor, where they lived, their context, you may need to understand the laws a little bit. So there's some wonderful materials in our law library. And then we have our rare books collection, which also would have a number of really amazing materials for genealogical research. Those you do need to set up an appointment to view our rare materials. So if you're searching in our catalog and you find anything that says Library of Michigan Rare 4N as the location, contact us and we'll get you set up with our the librarian who oversees the rare reading room, and you guys can set up an appointment to view items. And as you're looking through these different materials that we have and you realize, I have like a set of city directories from Muskegon, and I wonder if the Library of Michigan will want them. I don't need them in my house anymore. Please feel free to take a look at our michigan.gov/library gift to see if any materials that you don't need anymore, you don't want, you'd rather have other researchers have access to that. If you see those materials listed on that website, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always accepting donations of materials. There's just so much in Michigan's history, and we want to make sure we get it all, but it's impossible without the help of amazing researchers like you keeping your eye out for us. And then on there, it also lists how you can support the mission and the services and programs of the Library of Michigan through a donation to the Library of Michigan Foundation, which is our nonprofit that assists the Library of Michigan. So take a look at that if you get a chance. All right, now we're getting to the juicy stuff. We are going to be talking about how you can use state and local documents for your research. And a lot of you are thinking, why would we want to use that? That doesn't have genealogical information. It's just a bunch of government documents and statistics. And you're not wrong. Those things are in there. You're going to find statistics. You're going to find financial information. And that may actually also be helpful to your research. But one of the amazing things that you can find in some of these government documents are just the details about different people, individuals within the state. Because really, state and local documents are all about the interactions between the public and government entities, which we do all the time. And governments create a lot of paper, a lot of documentation. So there's quite a paper trail. You can find things like the names of key personnel and those different people who are interacting, narrative descriptions of different holdings and activities. Photographs are oftentimes found within state documents. You'll see a couple examples throughout this presentation. Of course, statistics, financial information, even things like inventory lists of property and equipment. So very detailed information, historical information, and so much more. So we're going to talk about different things that you're going to find. But first, we might need to understand what a state document is. I've kind of talked about it, but really we need to, at least for Michigan, talk a little more about what that means. It's information that's compiled by an entity of Michigan state government and is intended for an audience outside of that authoring agency. So this means it's something that's meant to be available to the public. This isn't going to be, notes from a meeting or a memo, interagency memo. This is going to be the annual report, that Michigan Department of Transportation map to show the highways. Things like that. They're meant to be seen by the public and show what the government agency is doing and how they're interacting. What's wonderful about these is they can provide a real snapshot of the organization, state government as a whole, the people and attitudes of the people of Michigan. It really gives a lot of great information and context about the state and the people who interacted with those various agencies. So even if you're not finding something specifically about your ancestor, these documents can really give you that historical context of what their life was like and what they would have been dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Would they have been standing in line at the DMV or having to make sure that they got their auction licensed with the city agency? So it gives you a really great idea of what life was like then. And it's important to note when you're doing research, especially as you're doing more recent research or recent time period, as of 2006, the primary format for Michigan documents is electronic. This doesn't mean that Michigan only produces electronic documents. That is just the primary. That's like the first choice for how documents will be produced and what format they'll be in. There's a core list of documents that also have to be produced in print, and then there's some other things that will be for various reasons. But that is important to note. So you are going to need to get familiar with searching websites and being online for that period. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some places where you can find state documents online. These are not just the current state documents. These are going to be historical as well. Obviously, the State of Michigan website is probably a good place to start when you're looking at the department. Oftentimes they will have an archive up to a certain point, or a number of reports or different things that could tell you where you might want to go. The Michigan Legislature website, that is going to have the public acts, bills, some analyses. I think it's about 1990s. I want to say, I always forget what the exact date is, but it's again more recent. Those have been the House journals that have been digitized. They're up on that website for the 1990s, sometime in the 90s forward. LM Digital is the Library of Michigan digital, so our digital collections page. And we have a number of different things related to state government that have been digitized. We also have a wonderful city charters and codes website that I forgot to put on this slide, but I will make sure that I throw it in the chat at some point during this presentation. And that is on LM Digital as well, but that has those local city charters, codes, ordinances, not everything in Michigan, but a nice collection. We have even more in print at the library, but that could give you an option to search just from the comfort of your own home. So we'll talk about that a little more. Michiganology, that is the Archives of Michigan, their website, and there's a number of things that have been digitized on there related to state government or as state documents. Of course, the death records, many of you are familiar with from 1897. Adam will know exactly what year.
1897 up until the 1940s.
Thank you. 1897 to 1940s. I was like, oh, I'm a little fuzzy on the dates there. Those death certificates have been digitized and are available there. And then there's some other documents and other materials as well that you'd want to look at. The How Do You Trust Digital Library and Internet Archive are both free websites that have the digitized historical materials. And I used How Do You Trust a lot for doing the research for this. It's a great resource for old state and federal government documents. So I would highly recommend taking a look at all of these. And then, there we go. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You know, where there's
oh, I think I hear someone. Maybe. Does someone have a question?
I just muted him. I don't think they had a question. So continue on. If they have a question, they will loop back.
All right, sounds good. No worries. All right. So now that we know where we can find these documents, it's important for us to realize when we're trying to discover who or what agency our ancestor was interacting with, we actually need to understand a bit the structure of government. And it's confusing and it changes and the names change a lot. So there are tools to kind of help you understand state government. There's even more than I'm talking about here. I just kind of wanted to focus on a couple tools. You know, if you want to, are you really interested about delving deeply into understanding Michigan state government? There's many books that have been written about it. Please feel free to reach out to us. We can get you in touch with some more resources. But two big ones are the Michigan Manual. This is the handbook and directory for state government. And it includes some really amazing things, biographical information about the legislators, structure of the government at the time, so you can see the name of the department, who was the head person, gives you some of the details about the department, and then election results, which I just think is really interesting. And then there's so much more. I really recommend this. Is just an incredible historical resource for Michigan. But it does really help with that structure. For example, Michigan Department of Education, we were the Department of Public Instruction at some point. DNR, or Department of Natural Resources, used to be the Department of Conservation. Things changed. Different offices would move to different departments. So you would need to know, oh, this is the department or the division that my ancestor would have interacted with in order to get this license that they needed to open their business. So some of it is you kind of need to understand what government was like at that time for them. And the Michigan Manual can really help. LM Digital is another excellent resource. I'm just highlighting one of our collections from there. Another one is the city charters and codes. But this one is the Michigan Legislative and Statutory Materials. Wow, it's a mouthful. And it includes an excellent couple of indexes to local and special acts of Michigan, and also the state bills and analyses. This can help you understand really the laws and the nature of, you know, the legal context in which your ancestor was in, and would explain to you, would help you understand, you know, what was required of them by the state so that they could be going about their life legally. So if they're a barber, who do they need to be talking to be licensed to be a barber, according to the law? So again, it can get complicated, but these materials can help. And what's wonderful is that LM Digital is online. You can also find some Michigan manuals. I believe some of them have also been digitized, although we have them all in print at the Library of Michigan. So do feel free to reach out to us if you need help finding some information. All right, now we're going to talk about local government documents. Again, this is kind of the real boring part where I have to throw a lot of information at you, but it's trying to get you thinking about how this would be helpful to you in a greater context. But it's important to understand, you know, local documents, much like state documents, they are intended for an audience beyond just the authoring agency. They are also for the local governments, you know, they're wanting to see this information, but it is moving that beyond to the public as well. It's something that will be seen. And it's going to be a township, a village, a city, or county. Some of you may notice that I didn't put tribal nation in here. I didn't talk about that aspect, and that's because that is different. Tribal nations are going to be more, they're very unique in that sense that they're not a local government, they're not a state government, they are their own separate government within the state. So they work with the state entities, but they're going to have their own structure. So I'm just leaving that out for this talk today. I think you could do a whole talk specifically for tribal governments, but that's why that is not included in this local documents piece. And what's wonderful about local documents, they really, again, they provide that snapshot. They show the people, the government, the events that were going on in that locale. And sometimes you can find some amazing things like this annual report cover that I stole from Adam's presentation because I love it so much. You get actually a picture of the road in 1921 from the Kent County Road Commission. It's wonderful. All right, now this one, there are local documents online as well. HathiTrust, Internet Archive. There are some public and academic libraries that have digitized different collections of these. Of course, the Library of Michigan Digital City Codes Ordinances collection, the municipal websites, but there is a lot of print or a lot of physical places that you will need to go to look at these materials in print. I always say, you know, if you're trying to figure out where do I start to find certain records or to find certain materials, start with the clerk's office for that locale. Go to them first, say, hey, I'm looking for this. Do you have this? If they do not, they can at least hopefully point you to who those materials had gone to, whether it was the archives or it was donated to a library or whatever it might be. Again, if you are able to find municipal or state archives that would have these materials, that's wonderful as well. Libraries, historical genealogical societies, museums, there are a lot of different institutions that make sure that they try to preserve these materials and collect them. But unfortunately, you might have to go to a few different places to find what you're looking for. It's not always straightforward. Newspapers are a wonderful place to look as well. Oftentimes, even if it's not the state document itself, they're going to be reporting about a local government event, whether it's the meeting of the Common Council. And I have a couple examples a little later to show you, but you can find out some great material. I was helping someone recently. They were trying to find government documents on a specific road construction, and they couldn't find the document under what they thought they'd be able to find it. So we looked in a newspaper to figure out if there was a hearing about it. That gave us at least a date range. Oh yes, they did have a hearing. They talked about it here. It gave us a date range and some more information to then allow us to see, okay, what more information, what other way could we look for this document? So sometimes you can use it as a clue to find what you're looking for as well. And so that's kind of exactly what this is. I pulled 3 examples just from the Detroit Free Press. So this is one paper, mind you. It talks about a common council meeting, what they discussed, who was present at the meeting, what unfinished business there was. Then you have, so that's the city government. The middle article is about state government. And so they're reporting on bills that are being debated in the House, on what day, who said what, this representative was saying this. On the far right is a county commission meeting, reporting on that. And so again, we got in one paper 3 different government entities being reported on, their specific meetings, who was there, what information they discussed, what's being debated. So newspapers can be a very, very important tool when trying to find this. Now, sometimes it can be very difficult to discover what local government your ancestor was a part of. And that seems crazy because you think, well, you've got the name of the place that they lived. That's it, right? That should be easy. I'll just look up that city now, go to their office, or I'll look up that county. Well, the fun thing is there's a myriad of problems that sometimes happen. And when you've ever done land research at all, you've come across this. Sometimes you get these mystery locations that when you try and plug it into the map, you can't find it. It's not showing up in Google Maps. It's not showing up anywhere in a Google search. That is when you're going to want to look up that name and see, is this just a geographical feature? Is this a post office? So I have a couple examples of places you might want to go to if you're trying to figure out what the heck this mystery location is. I highly recommend Michigan Place Names by Walter Romig. We use it all the time at the Library of Michigan. It's just a great little alphabetical listing of different place names in Michigan with a little paragraph about, what it is, where that came from, as much information as would be helpful. Also check to see if it's the name of a post office. This was very interesting to me. I didn't actually know this until starting working at the Library of Michigan, but especially in pretty small areas, you didn't really have a town per se. You would just say the post office name, and not all post office names are town names. And so this is a great reference material that we have at the Library of Michigan, just a typed list of chronologically ordered of when they opened. There's a nice alphabetical index to help us. And it tells you the name of the post office, which county it was in, when it was established, who was the first postmaster, and then a lot of other information. So that can really help you too with getting a better geography. I also recommend checking out a historical gazetteer. If you're still not finding anything, that could hopefully give you some more information, especially if you're able to find a historical gazetteer from around the time period that your ancestor was alive. That could give you a clue as well. And sometimes things just remain mysteries. Now, let's say you have a city and okay, yeah, this city, it's in this township now, it's in this county. And when you go to look up materials that are from that time period, you're not finding anything about that place in that county. And that is because townships changed throughout the history, and so did counties. So I have a little example just to show you Michigan counties. This is from the County Evolution in Michigan, 1790 to 1897 by the State Library Services, us. And what's interesting, this is just Michigan counties, 1822, and then the next page is 1828. And you can see that the UP and most of the northern lower peninsula was Michilimackinac County. In 1828, you now have Chippewa County for the UP. So that can be really helpful when you're doing your research. If you're trying to look for information about, oh, Marquette, I know it's Marquette. It was Chippewa County at the time, but maybe it was actually 1822 that you're wanting to look at. Well, then actually it would be Michilimackinac County. So that can be really helpful with trying to figure out where your ancestor lived and who they would have been interacting with, which government. So that's one resource, just the county guide. There's the Evolution of Michigan Townships is excellent. They're wonderful because they show you, oh, this township was formed from this township, which was originally formed from this township, which originally was in this county. I mean, it gives you the full, like you just follow the counties and the townships as they're being made. And they give you, they let you know, oh yes, this is in the index of local and special acts. So you could even go and see the local or special act that created this township, that created this county. So that's pretty amazing to be able to have that historical view. And Adam reminded me of this, which is the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries from the Newberry Library. This is for the whole country. It's a website, and you can, again, it gives you that same sort of information of how county lines would change. I also highly recommend the Map Guide to the U.S. Federal Censuses, 1790 to 1920 by William Thorndale and William Dollarhide. This is, again, it's going to show you for the U.S., but each census, what the county lines were for that year. And what's great is it's overlaid on the map of the current county lines. So if you know, oh, I know it was this county, well, that can be helpful if you can just see, okay, this county, oh yeah, here, I can see it was a different county at that time. I've got the current overlaid with the historical. So a really helpful thing. And again, that local and special acts that I mentioned, it's really wonderful to be able to just see the evolution of the county and of the township within the local acts of Michigan, or local and special acts of Michigan. So that's the land research side of things. Who knew, looking into your ancestor, you're just wanting to look up, give me some biographical information real quick. Just tell me about them. It's never that easy. You have to sometimes do a little bit of land research. You have to sometimes do a little bit of legal research. And that's where this kind of falls in, is that understanding those local governments. If you know that your ancestor had interactions with the local government, they were a business owner, they were a firefighter, whatever it might have been, you need to understand a little bit of the city charter, the ordinances, the structure of the government that they were interacting with at that time. This would help you understand, okay, what department is my ancestor going to be interacting with? So I pulled this from HathiTrust, City Ordinances of Hamtramck. And just on this page, it talks about, oh, well, if you want to do this, you need to talk to the city council. Any licenses issued under the provisions of the ordinance, they can be revoked by the common council. So, okay, well, you need to talk to the common council there. So something else, the registration of such number shall be under the administration and control of the police department. Okay, well, you might need to talk to the police. So just on this page, there's a couple departments right there that, depending on if this is a license that your ancestor would have had to deal with, they're going to need to go and talk to that department. And so you kind of know, okay, here's a paper trail I can pull from. And it also provides that legal context for your ancestor's life and would reveal some unique ways that your ancestor would have interacted with government. And there may be a paper trail. So always exciting. This was just, I pulled from the Charter and Ordinances from Sault Ste. Marie, I think it was 1892. And hawkers, peddlers, pawnbrokers had to be licensed. So, if you wanted to have, and my favorite was they were saying if you wanted to peddle goods, wares, merchandise, refreshments of any kind of property or thing by persons going about from place to place in the city for that purpose, or from any stand, cart, or vehicle. So if you wanted to have a food truck, pretty much back in 1890 Sault Ste. Marie, you would you'd have to get a license, which makes sense, but I hadn't really thought about that even back then they weren't just going to let somebody set up a cart and start selling stuff without making sure they had the proper licenses in place. It's a lot of fun things you discover. All right, now here's the part where I give you some practical examples of where you might find your ancestor, depending on what their time period was that they lived in, or what their occupation was. So we'll go through a few different examples. Now, of course, I'm going to talk about the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society collection. This is a 40-volume set with an index that really is the genesis for the Michigan collection. And it is a state document. They were starting to realize, hey, a lot of these early Michiganders, so early statehood settlers, are dying off. We need to start capturing this history in this story before we lose them. And so the state librarian at the time, Harriet Tenney, she got all of these pioneer and historical societies across the state to start compiling this information, taking down these stories and send it in so that they could be published in this amazing collection. So, I mean, and these are biographical, right? It's giving you people's names, their life experience, just pretty incredible stories in that. And they have been digitized, which is wonderful. And I would recommend, they're on HathiTrust. I recommend taking a look at this LibGuide from MSU. I don't know why I did this thing. It should be lib.msu.edu/mphc. It made it funny looking. But this is a wonderful research guide. So it's kind of like a little website with helpful information about the Pioneer Historical Collection, linking to where the different volumes have been digitized, helping you kind of understand how to interact with it. Really wonderful work done by a librarian there. And then I would also say, if you're looking at ancestors with early statehood history, I would recommend looking at special histories that have been commissioned by local governments. You'll see these a lot around big anniversaries like centennials, bicentennials, whether it's for the nation or for that locale. You'll see a lot of times they'll be like Lansing Bicentennial Commission, and it's a city commission that was created to take down this history. So things like that can be really helpful when you come across them, because they'll capture a lot of those early histories. Now, let's say you're trying to find them by their occupation. You could look through a myriad of occupations. I just focused on a couple as an example. Soldiers, especially for state documents, it's very rich in information for soldiers. I don't know if many of you have Civil War ancestors, but who deployed out of Michigan. If they did, they're going to be showing up in the Michigan Soldiers and Sailors Alphabetical Index, which was a state document, and it is incredible. It's an alphabetical index of all the soldiers and sailors who deployed out of Michigan. and it'll give a little brief synopsis of their service, whether they were injured. I've seen too that, whether they took a bounty, whether they received a bounty for their service. There's pretty incredible stuff in that collection. We call them the brown books lovingly because they're bound in this brown binding. We have many, many copies at the Library of Michigan, so please feel free to come in and we'll help you use them. I also wanted to point out, though, the Adjutant General's Office. They created these wonderful, beyond their main reports, they had these different periodicals called Special Orders, and then one called General Orders. And the stuff that you can find in these is just amazing. I showed a quick example of the General Orders from November 10th, 1909. So it's the exact day that this comes out. And they give a list of, these different organizations, this team. So it was this 2nd Infantry and their team, their total score as a team. And then it talks about specifically, the pistol match and which person did the best. And it gives like their specific scores, their name. Just amazing detail. So I do recommend taking a look at those as well. For local documents, look at the journals or proceedings of the city and common council. I just was doing a few example searches, and I was like, let me look at bounty for the 1863 City of Detroit Common Council Journal. And it would list, it would talk about how much of a specific bounty. They would like break up the bounties and who they went to. So you could see, this person received this much money as a bounty for serving in the Civil War, and things like that, where this is just in the everyday business of the city or common council, but they're listing people in exact financial information, how much money they received. So, and I also would recommend too, a lot of public libraries especially, for cities will help with creating some genealogical materials, such as, for the veteran cemetery or a veterans memorial in the city. So I've had a lot of luck with finding things that have been published by public libraries. So do recommend those as well. For educators, of course, I'm going to talk about educators with our MDE background. For state documents, there's some wonderful annual information in the annual reports, which Adam talked a lot more about annual reports earlier this year. So I recommend looking into that presentation if you've got time. But again, remember, it's Department of Education now. It was public instruction at one point. And then for local documents, there are these wonderful school directories for county school districts. I have a picture of one later in this presentation, but they're wonderful. They talk about, they give you the directory of the different teachers and staff. They don't obviously go into students, but it gives you just a lot of wonderful information as well. So let's say you're trying to find your ancestor by a specific identity group that is not often featured in government documents. Now, for women and African Americans, you're not always going to get that highlighted. They're not going to be the people featured in most times in different city and government and state government documents. And so oftentimes you're going to have to go look at the fraternal organizations, local organizations, non-governmental organizations, but there are a few examples that can really help you, and depending on the time period. There's an incredible state document for researching African Americans called the Michigan Manual of Freedmen's Progress. That was compiled by Francis H. Warren. It has been digitized. It's on HathiTrust. And there are pictures. This is just an example of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Williams and their children from Kalamazoo. I think it's such a lovely picture. And there are pictures of people's houses. There's biographical information, tells you all about this person and their life history. I mean, just an incredible resource from 1915, I think, is the second edition, or is that the first edition? It's early 1900s. I'm pretty sure it's 1915, but
it's 1915. It was
yes.
During the 50th anniversary of Emancipation and the Lincoln Jubilee, and that was going on in Illinois at the
Yeah,
time.
that's right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, I was like, I think 1915, and I was wondering why I was thinking that. Yep. So, so an incredible resource if you haven't had a chance to use that. For local documents, if you can find commission reports, oftentimes civil rights commission reports can be very helpful, at least for understanding the context for African Americans in that place. Sociological surveys too, sometimes it'll go granular into the opinions and the feelings of people and by their demographic group. That is kind of the same resource I recommend for when you're researching women in local documents. But for state documents, there actually was a Michigan Women's Commission reports, and they had other materials. Those, I think the earliest is 1970s. So again, it depends on the time period, and you might have to get a little creative. You know, women and African American Michiganders show up all over in government documents, but it's not necessarily like they're clearly delineated as being such, or they're not the focus. So you might have to get a little creative, but those are some tips for how you might find information. Do you have any other tips, Adam?
Not really. It's just one of those things that you kind of have to look around different, like you said before earlier, different celebrations, different other activities that are going on, because like with the Michigan Manual of Freedmen's Progress, that really wouldn't have been developed if there hadn't been a celebration that was going on, and two, an exhibit. Because and you'll see pictures of that if you look in the manual itself, that there was this large exhibit that was put on, showcasing a wide range of different things about African Americans in Michigan, such as the real McCoy, Elijah McCoy, was featured as part of that, and a few other different things. So it's some of them may be only one-offs, unfortunately, and others you might get lucky and find that it's something that's a little bit more periodic that they do develop. But if you don't find something, keep looking.
Yeah.
But don't rule out the fact that something may not exist.
Yeah. And I, and state and local documents are not the end all be all. Like I was saying, look at those fraternal organizations, look at the religious organizations, those things that made up a community that were not necessarily government, because those will provide you other resources as well. So there is plenty more to discover at the Library of Michigan. I just did a little sampling of some other examples because I just had too much fun. I will say the Board of Police and Fire Commissioners, it was really interesting. I found a spreadsheet of all the different fires and, who was involved in it, and, all this table of information about different fires that had happened at that time. So if oh, my family, their house burned down at some point, check the Board of Fire and Police, check their reports, because there may be information about their house fire. So, I mean, even things like that, a real traumatic event might be showing up in government documents. There's that yellow tiny booklet at the bottom is the annual list of teachers and school officers of Saginaw County. There's directory of township officials from Kalamazoo. There's the roadmap for Hillsdale County, Michigan. What's great, it has a directory, so on the back it'll let you know how long each road is and where you would find it, and so it gives that good scale and a good picture of where your ancestor would have lived at that time. And that's from the County Road Commission. And then I, of course, had to do the Michigan award-winning authors and illustrators. That one's a little more fun, but it tells you these different Michigan authors and where they live generally. So it gives you their location. So you can find so much more on the Library of Michigan's online catalog at answercat.org. So I do recommend just taking a look, try different keywords, play around with what you think you might find. You'll be surprised at what has been produced. And it doesn't have to be a state and local document. That's okay if it's not. But if you do have any state and local documents that you'd like to donate, or you want to just support the Library of Michigan's document collections, again, please visit that michigan.gov/librarygift for more information. And now I'll take any questions. So I see there's some chat. I think Adam's been doing a pretty good job with answering that.
Yeah, most of the questions were just about if there was a handout, and then asking about I just mentioned that there will be a recording that will show up in a few hours on Facebook, and then we'll also have it on YouTube, and I put the link to where the playlist of where our family history research content is. But if you do want to unmute yourself, feel free to ask questions, and we'll try to answer them.
I will say, if people do want a handout, I can just send you this presentation as well. If you want it as like a handout PDF, I can do that. I'll give it to Adam and he can get that into your hands.
You mesmerized him, Mindy.
I know. It's they lulled him to sleep with government documents.
I don't think you lulled him to sleep.
Good.
But it is one of those things that, like, it's amazing the things that government produces, especially when you may not realize it. Whether somebody develops some sort of a commission and they're like, hey, we are celebrating the 175th anniversary of our town, and we want to produce something that is related to it, and not necessarily they want it to be done by government itself and maybe somebody else. It's and some of these things can be little handouts that only are 15 to 20 pages long, as opposed to something that's like 150 to 200 pages, like what the Michigan Manual is. So you can be like a celebratory service about like the creation of a cemetery, and you may find more information about the cemetery itself because of where you have ancestors buried because of something like that. And
there's some cool stuff out there. I mean, it was fun doing the research for this and just the things that I was discovering. I was like, I didn't know this was around. This would have been helpful to know about, 3 weeks ago when I had this question.
So. Well, that's the one thing about GovDocs is that there's always a few things out there that you're going to discover in the future.
So, I'm glad you guys enjoyed, and
I think there is at least one request that's for a handout. Mindy, I'm going to just put it in your teams so that you got their email.
See, Mary Dowling. I'll get that to you, Mary.
Yep.
Would anyone else like a handout? Go ahead and put your name in the chat.
Mindy, I have a question for you.
Sure.
For quite some time, Adam, you probably know this. I've been trying. It's Marge. I've been trying. Hi, Miss Matt. Tell him I said hi.
Will do.
I have an undocumented comment in some papers that I had gotten some years ago that this fella up in Hayes Township in Charlevoix County that he quote unquote was the supervisor.
Hmm.
And last year, the year before, I had spent some time working on that. I talked to Lansing. I talked to Charlevoix County. I talked to Hayes Township. I talked to Clark over in Mount Pleasant, and nobody can seem to find anything to give me whether that's a true statement or not. The only thing I found recently, and I don't know what happened to it, was I found a little blurb in a newspaper it looks like this fellow was actually on the jury for something in Hayes Township, as opposed to being a supervisor. So,
which would be why you haven't been finding him, probably.
well, I found the guy. I know where he is and all that stuff. But, to substantiate the comment that's unsourced, that he was a supervisor. So I'm kind of wondering if this Michigan manual thing that you were talking about a little bit ago covers Charlevoix County, Hayes Township, and whether or not you thought there would be some information in there to either, I'm just about ready to put that on the wall list,
Yeah.
with a few others.
I would, so does it sound like it would be a supervisor for the local government or a supervisor? This would be something that would be involved with state government.
I'm thinking it's going to be local government for Hayes Township.
Yeah, it would not be in Michigan manual then. So the Michigan manual is only going to deal with the state government structure, and even with that, it's more of just the higher level and legislators. It's not necessarily going to list, specific
to the local level. Because
no,
best I can figure out, he was relatively well known. He's probably one of the original settlers for Hayes Township. 1876 thereabouts, until he did himself in with Paris Green.
Oh.
And there's stories about that too. So.
Oh my gosh, there's so many stories, right? The more you dig into your family history, you're like, wow, people are complicated, right?
They are, and as much as everything's changed over the years, it's really kind of interesting that so much of it is really still the same.
Yeah,
I'm really kind of amazed at the contrast, but but the family is well known in the area. They were, very prominent. It was a large family. They had a general store, so to speak, on Pine Lake or Charlevoix Lake.
So it wouldn't be surprising if he did end up as a supervisor or in
the
somehow involved.
Right, because usually it was the people that were, I don't know how to put it, well known, active within the community, are the ones that ended up being, the city council or the, like the supervisor, that type of a position in town.
And you could, depending on the year, what year would this be? Or years?
Well, he would have been in there probably from 1876, and he died in 1887, I think.
Okay. So it could be, at that point, you're probably going to have some proceedings of the city council or the common council. So you could look at some of the journals or the proceedings for see, it's a tricky thing though. I don't know if the Hayes would have a city council or if it would be like the county supervisors. That'd be the tricky thing, is trying to figure out, who's sort of the ruling person and were they keeping journals or proceedings.
Well, some of the annual reports for townships and cities sometimes list like if somebody is being reimbursed money, and when that's the case, they may also list their title. So I know, like in the 1920s for Paris Township, which is now Kentwood, city of Kentwood, you would be able to find in their township annual reports and some of their other things that list like, oh, somebody was reimbursed money for such and such reasoning, and then underneath it, it would say, oh, they were the highway supervisor, or they were a justice of the peace, or clerk, or something like that. And it's possible that the person you're looking into may get mentioned in there some way, either
Mm-hmm.
and with a title listed with their name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I was trying to find, was like minutes to council meetings or whatever you want to call it. And Hayes Township doesn't have anything.
Mm.
The lady that I spoke with there, she wasn't real sure, but because obviously she didn't put me on hold to go and check, but she thought it was only back to like 1940.
Mm.
And so then,
Yeah.
if they don't have it, I went to the county, and they don't even get that kind of stuff, so they wouldn't have it to start with if it existed.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I don't know if I had at that time contacted you, Adam, or maybe it was Matt, or somebody over in the archives, but I just I haven't been able to find anything.
Yeah.
So
And it could be, like you said, it may not exist, where it may have existed at one point and burned down or was lost in a flood, or
somebody the plain house.
yeah, somebody just like, I don't want to hold this anymore. Yeah, unfortunately it does happen.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
Satellite County had that at one point back in the 50s or 60s, where they had a pipe burst, and you can see
Ugh.
pictures of where they were hauling some of the stuff out. And one of the things that they said, we don't need these anymore, were the superintendents of the poor records, which me, being the poor farm guy that I am, would have been like, oh my God, why did you do that?
Yeah,
But,
so hindsight is 2020.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
And retention laws should be much more strict, but unfortunately they are not.
Yeah. Well, I'll
that's a
go
whole
ahead
nother
and oh yeah. Well, it's already
well,
7:30, so I don't want to keep people too much longer. Is there anybody else who's got any questions?
thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marge.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Marge.
Well, I would say, if you do have any questions, I didn't forget to actually show you the last slide. You can contact us. We've got an email, librarian@michigan.gov, our phone number, 517-335-1477. Give us a call, send us an email. We'll try and brainstorm with you and think of anything else that might help. But yes, unfortunately, sometimes there are dead ends, but we'll try to find every option there is. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and I really appreciated being able to share this with you.
Yep. And if anybody is looking to, I think I grabbed all the emails of everybody who is looking for a copy of the presentation. And just a reminder, if you do want to sign up for any of our next ones, make sure you go to michigan.gov/LM public programs. I'll put that in the bottom of the chat again. And hope to see you next month or in the building here sometime in the future. So good night, everybody.
Good night.